introduce myself. Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Andrews. I have worked at the Soil Association, which is mostly associated with organic food and farming for the last, I think, nearly 15 years. I'm shocked to say. My main role at the moment is I run a UK-wide program called Sustainable Food Places, and we work with 60 local food partnerships, cross-sector food partnerships across the UK, to make healthy and sustainable food a defining characteristic of where they live. So that includes cities, but also city districts, counties, and other areas. And you're probably aware that there is a Sustainable Food City Lancaster partnership. I've been a long-term member of the programme, led by Anna Clayton of Less, and I think she spoke to you some weeks or months ago.
She did, yeah, we did. We did speak to Anna.
Well, I hope I'm not going to repeat her, but anyway, here we go.
Sure. You should be able to share now, yeah.
Okay. So it is literally 3 slides, and it probably reinforces what you may have been told before, which is, if you want to do anything about climate, and we don't just talk about climate, we talk about climate and nature, because there are 2 combined emergencies. The single biggest contributor to both of those emergencies is food, farming, and land use. Now, there are lots and lots of descriptions about the proportion of GHG and other impacts related to climate and nature from farming and land use. And this is just one of them, but you can see there in total, nearly 50% of all impacts. It's bigger than the energy sector contribution to climate. It's bigger than the transport system contribution to climate. So whether that's at home, in your neighborhood, in your workplace, or across an entire area, if you're serious about climate and nature, you've got to work on food and farming in one form or another. So there's one diagram. Here is another, different format, and the numbers do seem to vary because the way they calculate is different. A lot of energy production comes off the land. Livestock is a massive contributor. Of course, you transport your food. Agriculture in its just before the farm gate is what it's talking about there, outside of livestock production, is very significant. And of course, there's food manufacture as well as waste disposal, and also changes to land use. And just I wanted to reinforce that point about nature, which I think is actually just as big an emergency as the climate one. And as you can see there, in terms of effect on biodiversity, agriculture is by far the biggest contributor to species lost across the globe, including in the UK. Obviously, forestry is also connected to that, and things like ecosystem fragmentation. But all those things, essentially, on the right-hand side, beyond the dark green, are in one form or another linked to land use. So what I'm going to suggest to you is you need to spend some time talking to me about what we're trying to do about it. I'm going to talk about 2 different areas. One is that we're currently working on the development of a global climate and nature declaration, which involves cities and local authorities across the world. And what I'll be able to do in that is to describe to you some of the actions that we're going to be asking local authorities to take to try and combat the climate and nature footprint of their local food and farming system. That's it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tom. So if as you've got 50 seconds remaining, is there anything that's top of your mind for what you would like to see Lancaster doing in this area?
Well, there's 2 at the end of this process. One is I'm going to suggest that you all, including the council, fully support the work of Sustainable Food City Lancaster Partnership, because they are working very actively around this whole agenda and will help you to find the best answers locally to the food, the food and farming elements of your climate and nature emergency. And the other one is I would like to suggest that your council should sign up to this global declaration and participate in the stream of 2 or 3 years of work that will come out of that, which is again about specific actions you can take locally that are most suitable to your local circumstances, because of course everywhere is different. And that's what I was just going to tease into in the next section.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks very much, Tom. So if you've been part of the food and farming groups so far and have got any remaining questions out of that you want to put to Tom, and if you want to follow up on any of those other ideas, especially those 2 things that he was talking about at the end, then group C is the one for you. So I'm going to go on to Group D now, which is education. And we had a request early on to talk about what's happening in primary and secondary schools in terms of education for young people on climate change, and how best to address things. So we've got Professor Robert Barrett here from Lancaster University. So I'm going to hand over to you for 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Very nice to be here. I should say I work for Lancaster University, but it's also a joint role with the Eden Project. So I'm the Eden Project North Chair of Education and Engagement based at Lancaster University. And colleagues may be aware of the Eden Project North initiative to build a new venue next to the Midland Hotel. And our aspiration with the partners, which is the City Council, City County Council and the LEP and Lancaster University, is that the venue opens 2024. So I've, over the last 2 years, been working with a whole range of stakeholders around Morecambe Bay, developing an Eden Project North education strategy, which is essentially a workforce reform agenda. And so we've been inviting, through public consultation, colleagues from the early years, special needs schools, secondary schools from Cumbria and Lancaster, further education colleges and the universities, and those young people in residential care and NEETs to be involved in conversations about developing a new curriculum. So that's the space in which I'm coming from. So in respect of this evening then, I'd like to...
Could you tell us, Robert, what NEET, you use the term NEETs?
Apologies, yeah, so NEETs is not in education, employment or training, so young people. And at the moment, there's people may know this, 11,500 young people are displaced nationally to Morecambe and put into residential care. And there are 90 county lines gangs running at the moment. And there's a huge disconnect between the education offer and employment. So there, as we know, there's a number of many workless families, and young people believing the education system is not leading to employment. And so crime is an alternative in terms of, as we heard earlier, an opportunity to get funding to buy food. So we're doing quite a big piece of work on supporting and talking with colleagues in the education system to think differently about living in Morecambe as a place, that it's a good place to be, it's a healthy place, and it is a healthy place to live. And also that it's a positive environment in relation to the work that we're doing, in that we're trying to bring business partners together with education partners to co-construct a new education offer that would lead to meaningful employment for young people. So in relation to this evening, I'm conscious of the time. My question I would like to pose actually at the start of this is, do we all, and I'd like to emphasize all, believe that there is a planetary emergency? And that question all picks up on sort of the work of Henrik and John earlier. And I suggest that maybe not all people actually do believe there is a planetary emergency, and that this is impacting on the planet's survival systems. And so these crises include climate change, biodiversity, loss of habitat loss, deforestation and pollution. And if those things are actually happening, and there's people that we're talking to that don't believe that those are happening at the moment, then, and the answer to that for you, not necessarily in this group, but is it a question for us globally, for us as a civilization on this planet, say yes to that, then how does the global education system support our civilization to respond to this situation? And then in England, if we turn to the England education system, how is the school system and the national curriculum meeting this challenge? And it's not a new challenge. In 1864, people may know, George Marsh wrote a text called Man and Nature, and he was the founder of environmental science. And then he was arguing that there was a real concern about the impact of humans on Earth and what that might lead to. So that was over 150 years ago. So we're not facing a new challenge. It's one that's been developing over a long period of time since man was on Earth, humans on Earth. So if we turn to the national curriculum then, it is true that there are references to climate change in the national curriculum, and certainly in the statutory programmes of study at Key Stage 3 and 4. Sorry about that educational language technology stuff there. But between
Robert, just to say, there's a minute left now.
Okay, in the ages of 11 and 14, if you study geography and science, which you'll have to do, you will study something to do with climate change. But my concern is that this should start much earlier, and the conversations in the workshops afterwards may want to explore this, that as a minimum, climate change education should start in the early early years in the education foundation stages, and also that attainment and assessment of attainment in education at the moment is singularly focused on each person's academic performance and not on the education system's performance to impact on the health of the ecosystem. So I'd like to see the education system focus on practical projects that improve the health of the environment. So in our discussion later on, if it's possible, 4 areas to discuss. One is the national curriculum, what's taught and who decides what's taught, whether or not we could reimagine a new sustainable curriculum that focuses on climate change, and then to consider 2 other areas. One is to discuss the United Nations Climate Science Teacher Training Programme, and in Yorkshire that's already running. So that's each area in Yorkshire would have a climate change teacher. And finally, to look at eco-anxiety, young people's concerns about the health of the planet and the future that they're inheriting through Greta Thunberg's work.
That's great. Thank you, Robert, for that very handy summary at the end there. So any of those things that Robert's outlined, and I'm sure if you've got other ideas that you'd like to follow up with him, he would be happy to do that as well in Group D. So the final theme and speaker in this slot at the moment is James Somerville, who works for an organisation called Agility Eco, and we have asked him to speak because of your interest in retrofitting and energy efficient housing, and what can be done with city councils. What's examples of what's been done in partnership, and James's organisation does a lot of this sort of work across the country. So thank you, James. I'll hand over to you for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. So it's lovely to be here. I think that there's absolutely loads that the City Council is doing and can do to improve the energy efficiency of homes in the district. So retrofitting homes, taking old homes and bringing their standards up to being as good as new homes that are being built, and also to also ensure that new homes that are being built are also fantastic in terms of being low carbon footprint, generating loads of their own energy, being really comfortable, looking great, all that kind of thing. There is also a question, I think, about whether the council can use council tax discounts to help promote that kind of work. I think there's less scope for that. But in the group, I'd be certainly very keen to talk about some of the things that I've been doing with councils across the country, which is what my company does, and also locally as well, because I'm a director of a local community interest company. So in both roles, very interested in helping local authorities and other partners as well to put together fantastic programs that really excite people and support people, especially people on low incomes and in fuel poverty, so people who find it hard to heat their homes. And that's where I think a lot of the money is available at the moment. But the government have really made a big splash just in the last few weeks with something called the Green Homes Grant, which you might have heard of, is a £2 billion investment into retrofit across the country, some of which will be spent by councils, but most of which is going directly to households to pay for things like insulation and low carbon heating. So there's going to be, I think, a lot of interest, but there's a lot of hoops to jump through as well to properly retrofit a home. And I think you've had some support and information before about what kind of things you can do to a home and how you can improve it. And obviously it costs money, but that's just one thing. There's also a load of other stuff that you need to get through, not least of which is people's interest in actually having that kind of work done. And people will have different reasons other than reducing their carbon footprint, obviously, to have that kind of work and potentially to invest themselves, their time and their energy and their money into having that work done. So, I mean, just briefly, I suppose we could talk about in the groups what the council can do with its own properties, so social housing, and the council has an obligation to make those really good. And generally around the country, social housing is some of the best in terms of energy efficiency. And I know Lancaster City Council has done an awful lot of work on those. But what more could be done to help lower bills even more for tenants, to make them completely carbon neutral? And then what the council can do for private tenants, so people who rent their homes from landlords, and how that rental sector can be properly regulated. And the council does have quite a lot of powers, even the city council, to get after rogue landlords and to improve properties and to make things better for tenants. And it's often private tenants who are living in the least energy efficient properties. And then certainly for owner occupiers as well. I don't think the council could really spend its own money on helping people to install improvements, because the money would quickly run out, even if it was loaned out. But there's lots that can be done to help homeowners and households to understand what's out there and what improvements can be made and how to find someone to do those improvements. So there's loads that we could talk about there. And of course, obviously, in terms of planning as well, and the council has recently, I think, agreed finally the local plan for the area. And part of that is ensuring that new developments are sustainable. So yes, as I said, loads that is being done and can still be done as well.